Welcome to the Endurance Drive podcast. Our mission is to share the key principles that structure our approach to endurance training and coaching. I'm Katie.
And I'm Elena.
Hey, Elena. It's the middle of the summer. We've got some exciting stuff to talk about today, but we are getting this done before you are embarking on some travel, and then I'm going to be traveling, and things are just sort of chaos. So I'm excited to be sitting down with you today.
Me too. I was actually looking forward to this as like a grounding moment. I was telling Katie right before we started recording that I'm in that phase like 2 days before leaving for a 2-week trip in Europe where I'm like, I'm so excited to travel, but it's too stressful with everything I have to do before I get on that flight. So once I'm on that flight, I will be very excited. But yeah, wrapping up some of the work before a 2-week vacation, which is kind of crazy. Like I feel like I don't really take that much time, but it just worked out this way. So yeah, I'm excited.
I'm so excited for you, and we all should be taking time like that. I do have a training question for you, which is when you go on trips like this, obviously this is an international trip. You mentioned to me that you were first going for a wedding and then some family travel. Do you try to stick to like a pretty specific sort of training regime? Do you use it as more like exploration time? I'm sure it varies based on where you're going, but how do you approach movement in the context of travel when you maybe have some goals on the horizon, A races, B races, etc.?
That's a really good question. And I think it actually will entirely vary by what my headspace is and what I'm preparing for. Right now, I'm not feeling like I have to be grinding, preparing for something in particular, but I'd like to keep my volume consistent. And then also, and I was actually going to make a point on this, I really love the idea of seeing a place through running. And so I typically get actually like most excited. This is maybe how you know that I'm a runner slash athlete, where I'm like looking at this trip and there's all these things that you can do. And like what I am most excited for is the runs that I have planned in these locations to like see different things. And part of that is like location based. Like one, I'm going to Budapest first. I lived there for 6 months in college and I used to run there all the time. And I'm so excited to go back and run these routes that made me feel so alive when I was younger. And actually, like when I was falling in love with running, it was because I was falling in love with running in different places. So a lot of it's joy based. And I think we'd encourage that for every single person, especially while traveling. Like you don't want to ruin your vacation by stressing about your training the whole time. Of course not. So I think it depends on where you are. And some of that will just be like life planning too. Like obviously some trips are unavoidable, but if you're really in like an intense training block, like the last couple months before a really big A race, you might think about your travel in the first place a little bit differently. But if you were traveling, then maybe you know, hey, I'm going to hit my biggest rocks for the week. We've talked about that plenty of times before. Like, what are the biggest rocks? And you're going to find a way to hit those, but let the other things kind of slide by, which I also think is totally okay. So there's many different approaches here. My approach right now, though, is more relaxed and more adventurous based than anything because I just am not in a phase where I feel like I need to be hitting huge rocks. And what I am naturally excited about is doing some longer time on feet exploratory runs because that's just how I enjoy seeing a city. And also, I think walking around cities is more time on feet. So it's like I'm going to be walking a ton, which is different than my day-to-day life often. So there's trade-offs here and there, but it's a different approach based on what your goals are, where you are in that training block, where you're going. So that's where it's like great to talk to a coach about that and how you feel about it. But in this case, I'm just really excited to go have some adventure runs.
Yeah, I love that so much. And maybe a question for you is if you are going somewhere for the very first time, so obviously you've been to Budapest before, you have a sense of some of those run routes that you like, but if you're going somewhere brand new, how are you often finding routes for that? Like, will you go on Strava? Will you ask people any tips and tricks for just being in a brand new place? And this could even be like work travel in the United States. You have to go to some random city and you want to go for a run. How should we be thinking about that if you have any tips?
Ooh, good question. I do think that this is actually a skill I've developed without realizing it, that I love planning and finding new routes. I think there are a few different ways. First, if you know people who run, I obviously think asking for routes or like stalking their Strava if they have it is really helpful. Going to Strava and looking at routes that people run is always helpful. Typically, what I do if it's a place that I'm trying to sightsee is I'll try to get a sense of the city. Some people maybe don't love this as much as I do, but I really love understanding how things fit together. Like I love maps. So I'll typically pull up Google Maps, see what things I want to see, based on maybe even like, honestly, I might just chat GPT or whatever. Like, what are some main things I should see in the city? Like, how might they connect? And then I will see if it's plausible to do a running route by just looking at the map and going through them, or like how long that would be if I was running on the streets. I typically look for parks in cities. I think that's a really fun way, is like connecting parks, connecting green space. Is this maybe like always the safest way? Like, I think you could do some research to be like, where should I definitely avoid if there's things like that in a city? But I will also say that I've run in lots of parts of the world. Like I've run in many different places, and I have found for the most part that when I'm running around people in areas and just kind of like chugging on through, it's usually just like fine, but I also can't guarantee safety anywhere. So that's maybe take it with a word of caution of do your own research on where you would be going. But typically we'll just find places that I want to connect and then find ways to connect them. An example for we're going to be in Croatia and Dubrovnik for a wedding, and there's a known castle like hill up above the city. And I was like, well, I definitely want to run up to this castle. And there's some like steps back and forth. And then once you're up there on this bluff, there's some dirt roads that connect some rural areas. And I'm like, great, I'm definitely going to run on dirt roads in a rural area after running from my hotel up this castle hill. And it sounds super exciting and amazing to me. But I might report back and be like, yeah, there's like some parts of that were great, some parts that weren't. I don't really know. But that's part of the adventure. So I think getting enough information that you're excited to go, but also leaving enough open to adventure is typically my approach. But I think different people will have different levels of tolerance for uncertainty in that. And that's very fair. And obviously a great option always is to have a buddy that wants to go running with you. I think that will make it a lot safer and smarter no matter what. So I'm excited to have like Will come with me on this castle adventure run. And then once I'm up there, he's probably going to go back down to the hotel and I might do a longer run on some dirt roads, but we'll be up there to scope it out to begin with. So I think it's a little bit of, do your own research, but also have a little bit of fun with it.
Yeah, that's really, really great advice. And maybe one more question for you on this is, are you bringing anything specific in terms of gear? Like, will you take a running vest with you or specific fuel? Like, how do you think about packing for this sort of adventure travel running in terms of specific gear items or even like fuel hydration items?
Ooh, this is also a really good question. But I actually think at this point in my life, I pretty much always bring all my running gear when I go places because I just know that's always going to be an option that I want to have. So I'll bring a running belt, I'll bring a couple flasks, I'll bring some fuel, I'll bring my vest, and I'll bring my running shoes, of course. And typically I will decide if I want to bring trail or road shoes, depending on where I'm going. In this case, I might bring both, but if I have to choose one because of packing limitations, I'll probably just bring my trail shoes, honestly, because I really like my trail shoes and they'll be fine on road too. But I think people figure out what gear they really, really like and they can lean into that a bit. So I would say bring like running gear in particular is like pretty lightweight, just really great. Like a running vest is not too dissimilar than bringing a dress on vacation for me. So I typically just bring like the main stuff I need and then some fuel, and then I figure it out when I'm there if I need, maybe I'll bring some hydration packets too, like some salt pills actually might be really good, especially in the summer right now. So things that I know will make my life a lot easier, I try to bring from home, things that I think I can pick up if needed there, like, some extra bars or something, or some extra face sunscreen if I run out. I don't know. Things like that, maybe I'll pick up there. But for the most part, it's like what I typically use in my daily life, throw it in, bring it when I have the option. I don't know if I'll bring my vest. I might, but I also might just use my belt, but I'll have both. And that's typically how I travel now, pretty much everywhere, even on weekend trips, because I never know what I will be wanting to do. Sometimes you can plan in advance for sure if you know exactly what you want to do, but I think it's just nice to have options.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think the only thing I would add to that is having snacks from home, especially for those first couple days when you're in a new location. I find that's really helpful because like you might only be able to run at 6 in the morning or something, or you might be jet lagged and you wake up and there's like no hotel breakfast until whatever time. So for me, just having fuel for like before and immediately after is always really, really important because you're in a new place. So I would say plan for those first couple days of being in a new place of like, I have the fuel with me that I can get through the before, during, and after of a run, and then enjoy whatever cuisine of the new place is for the entire day. But just having that is usually pretty helpful for me in that hotel context.
Yep, for sure. I totally agree with that. And that goes along with planning the idea of the route, right? Because you could easily get there and sit on the couch for, an hour trying to figure out where to go. And I just feel like it can be so much more helpful to have a sense of where you want to go before you get there, especially on the first day, because then you have a reason to get out and like explore things. And I can't tell you how many times I've traveled somewhere and I'll go out for a run like that very first morning and the group I'm with is getting going and I come back and I'm like, cool, I kind of know like generally where we should go today because I just kind of saw it all while I was running. So I think that can be like a really fun way of just like getting oriented to a place, especially if you're like city touring, then it's a great way to like help navigate around for people. If you like doing that, I don't know, maybe I just like navigating too much.
Well, this is great because I feel like in your voice, I can hear like a lot of joy and a lot of motivation to go out and do this stuff. And I think that's actually a really nice segue into one of the points that you had on sort of the role of novelty and adventure in training motivation. And we have a couple different insights today. They're going to focus a little bit on training motivation and joy, which we talk about a lot. But why don't you hit that insight first, and then we can bounce around a little bit on how we can actually keep training fun, particularly in the summer when there are lots of sort of weather variables that can make it hard to really, really feel great about training all the time.
For sure. Yeah. I first off love that transition. Very smooth. I'll start with mine and then we can bounce back, Katie, because I know we had a listener question on this as well, which is pretty exciting. But I was relating it particularly to travel because it's been on my mind this week in particular with me planning my travels. And I also have a few athletes who are planning longer trips right now. And so it's been coming up of how we want to do that kind of training. So basically, I was just reflecting on the role of novelty and adventure in training and how significant it is in terms of my motivation, and particularly when, like, I think in the summer, a lot of people, I know I've been going through this and I've seen a couple athletes comment in their log, stuff like this with the heat. It can be kind of demoralizing. Sometimes you go out there and you're like, I just feel so heavy and dead, and you think you should be running certain paces, but your brain's not giving you the grace of, the heat and the humidity really affecting you. It can just be kind of like a drag sometimes. So I have found that in the summer, it's also really great times to plan adventures because, one, I think all sport modalities are typically available to you in the summer besides skiing. Maybe I should say all sport modalities. Different sport modalities are available to you. Water sports are more available to you. Biking is fully available. Running on road and on trail is available. So I think there can be some fun things that you can plan with, like multi-sport adventures that can be exciting. And then similarly, I also think that in the summer, there's just more opportunity for like these longer time on feet days because you're not worried about being out in the cold for so long, or you can manage yourself a little bit better. Yes, it can be really hot for sure, but you can typically manage that with like maybe jumping in a lake as you're going on a long day, or like being in the shade or something like that. So I have found that when thinking about bringing back some excitement and joy into training, the first place I typically start is what just sounds exciting. Like, what's an adventure or a challenge that sounds like, wow, that'd be like a fun thing to do. In the past, I've like made my own triathlons. I was just talking to an athlete who loves paddleboarding of like, can we just like have a day where you do all 7 of the sports that you like to do in one day? And like, is that a training stimulus? Yes and no. Like, we could get a similar training stimulus by doing like 2 or 3 of them, but like, wouldn't it just be fun to say that you did all 7 of them in one day? So I would just say, like, be creative and think about what sounds novel and exciting. If you're traveling somewhere, that's obviously a way to like say there's something novel to go see. If you're like home in your location, is there like a place that you haven't been that you can drive to 20 to 30 minutes away or something like that? Can you like jump in a lake afterwards? Can you visit the local deli and get like ice cream or something? What are some fun things that you can do to make this feel more of like a day out, a vacation, and adventure than just like your day-to-day training? A little bit of effort in that creativity and planning, I think, can go such a long way in like how you feel about the day when you're done with that. And Katie, I feel like you've had a lot of different examples of this as well in your own training. I've seen you do like really fun bike rides and like combine different things. So I'm kind of curious how you think about this as well in the summer, and especially in this phase of postpartum training, if that has like shifted or you're thinking it all around how you're planning these days.
Yeah, well, I think the point to underscore here is a lot of this just comes down to thinking outside the box of what your training generally looks like. And I think for me, being, I have a 6-month-old, almost 6-month-old now, and it's been interesting because I feel like the outside of the box thinking has been figuring out how I can fit in mom life and baby time with my movement. So it's like, what cool things can I do with a baby in a backpack? Like amazing hikes. I can do Harvard stadiums. I can do long walks up and down the hills of Beacon Hill. Like there's lots of different things in there that I can throw in, but they all are in the spirit of thinking a little bit of outside the box. And I've seen this sort of in other areas of my life too, where, let's say you're really demoralized by the fact that it is hard to train in the daytime. In the summer, it's sunny. Well, could you go out and do like a full moon adventure on a mountain or something, or do something like in the evening or really early in the morning? I think there's so many ways to just think about doing something new that doesn't even mean you have to pick up a brand new sport or plan something absolutely crazy. It can just be like, what are small ways to do this? So on the big and small scale, I would say zoom out, figure out what is maybe holding you back in training, or you feel like you're dragging your feet around, and then see whether there's like an easy swap that you could sub out there. And I think sometimes that can, at least just doing that a few times, can sometimes infuse enough joy back in that like the noon run in the 80% humidity run that you had to do, like it's actually not that bad because at least you've swung back around into the joy bucket a little bit. You don't need to have the perfect joy stimulus in every single movement session that you do for the rest of your life. Like that would be ideal if that were the case, but it's not. And so as long as you can tap into that enough to keep you excited about the whole project, I think that's usually like the way that I like to think about it.
Yeah, I love that point of just like having a bit of a boost when you need it, but not saying that it has to always be that way. This is just a tool to make things feel more exciting and fun throughout your process as you're chasing your goals. But interestingly, I think you also had a point on reframing or thinking about your goals such that they're also different or more exciting for what you are doing or what you're enjoying in your training. So I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts on that too, because I've also been looking at some of these different events, and there are so many different events out there now. And I have some athletes who are taking on some new challenges. I have an athlete who is excited about a swim run event in Maine, and an athlete who is doing a Ragnar for the first time. And I just think like, there's so many different formats now. So I'm kind of curious how you think about bringing in novel goals in addition to novel training stimuli.
Yeah, well, this came up for me because I had an athlete comment recently on, I think she had just thrown in like an extra hike or walk into her training week. She's getting ready for a Century bike ride was the main training stimulus that she's working on right now. But she said, this was really pleasant. I love hiking up and running down hills. Maybe I should start looking for events where I can do more of that to train. And in my head, I was like, this girl has to sign up for a trail race. Like that would be such a good idea. But sometimes I think we don't always think outside of the box when we've never done something before, which makes sense. You're not necessarily going to have in your suite of ideas of what you might do something that you have never, ever even considered or tried. But I like to look at athlete comments and think a little bit about like, okay, what is this athlete doing and what are they choosing to do when I'm not giving them a lot of prescription on what this exactly has to look like? So, for example, if they're going for an easy run, are they always still kind of picking like a hilly route, or are they preferring to go on dirt versus pavement? Or maybe they love pavement and they love flat and fast stuff or whatever it is. Similarly, even just thinking about what they do in their off season, or you thinking yourself about like, what do I do in my off season? I think all of that can give us some really good clues about what are some goal events that might actually be fun to train for in the future. So just like you were saying, like swim run, great example for someone who maybe enjoys running and has a swimming background but doesn't really do it a lot. Well, maybe they could try swim run. Or they really like triathlon, but they kind of don't like the biking. Maybe they've had a bike crash recently. Maybe they live in an area where the biking isn't safe. Great. Swim run could be a good fit for that. Alternatively, you might be a triathlete that absolutely hates to swim. Well, duathlon is a legit sport. Like there are awesome duathlon champs out there. You could totally crush that and not necessarily have to worry about the swim if that's something that you don't like. I think some people could even think outside the box of like if you come from a team sport background and you really love the community feel, but mixed with endurance, like you were saying, Ragnar, there's lots of different relay type races out there, or even like a triathlon relay that plays to your strengths. I think there's just a lot of different ways that we can think outside of the box, like we were talking about, to figure out what goal events best align with what we enjoy and what we're actually good at. Because I think sometimes we all need to come back to this idea of we are recreational athletes doing this at the end of the day for fun. And so ideally, your goal event brings you a lot of fun. And I think how you structure your training in your head or just in terms of your preferences can give us the clues of like what would actually be fun for you.
For sure. Yeah, I love that. And it actually made me think of a question. I'm kind of curious to put you on the spot. Like, obviously, we are endurance athletes primarily. We talk a lot about endurance athletes. I come from a hockey background. I actually did a lot more strength, but I kind of always considered myself more endurance because I loved running. But I'm very curious, Katie, because I've talked to many friends who are still in the hockey world or like we're very much strength athletes who have dabbled in running and kind of come back. How would you think about someone who has a totally different kind of goal? It's still athletic. It's just not even like an endurance kind of goal. It's like, I want to be able to do X number of pull-ups, or I want to compete in like a CrossFit or a high rocks or something like that. How do you think that relates to endurance training? Would you still want to be coaching them in that way? Would you say, please go pursue that and come back whenever? Like, how do you think about that in the broader context of athletic development?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think for me, I as a coach am always willing to take on a new challenge of something that I haven't tried, like specifically coaching before. And this actually comes up with a very specific example because I coach an athlete who recently did a 70.3, totally crushed it. She's going to do a marathon in the fall. But in the meantime, she came to me and she's like, hey, there's a Strava segment near my house. It's like a 2.5 minute climb on the bike. And I want to see if I can get the QOM. I'm about 20 seconds off. And in my head, I'm like, I have never designed a plan to do a sprint cycling effort that's 2.5 minutes long. Like you might say like, oh, it's cycling. You can do this as a coach. In my head, I was like, I literally have no idea how you would do this. My sense is it's probably a combination of like, what's the wind? Are you drafting? What's the humidity? Different things like that. But at the end of the day, I think most of these objectives, whether it's like you want to do high rocks or you want to do a Strava sprint segment or you want to do something that I haven't coached before, we can boil it down to what principles are helpful in coaching that could still get us there. So having some accountability, having some structure, having some consistency, I think that's a lot of what coaching brings to the table. So I'd like to think that, I would be upfront with athletes about like, hey, I haven't coached high rocks before, for example. But if you want someone to help you build out a plan of like, I am checking the boxes, we're in conversation about how it feels, we're thinking about together what might be the right thing to focus on there, I think I'd still probably jump at the opportunity to at least try it. But I would need to probably outsource the exact training modalities that we do. But then zooming back to this original question about like, how do we think about what we enjoy and what we're good at and choosing goal events based on that? If I had an athlete who loves strength training in their week more than any of the endurance stuff they were doing, but they still wanted some type of endurance goal event, then yeah, I would say like high rocks would be a great fit for something like that. It just comes back to like what you're actually enjoying. And I think too, there can be evolution throughout our season where maybe that's a focus for you during one season and then you come back later and you want to come back and crush a marathon or whatever. And I wouldn't say like I can't coach you anymore just for that reason, but I do think like I don't know what particular workouts we need to get ready for this. I still think that the coaching relationship is about a lot more than the particular workout. So we just need to kind of figure out like what is the best combination of things and inputs that we need to help get that athlete ready.
For sure. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And as you were speaking, it actually reminded me of something I saw from a trainer who's the sister of one of my close friends who trains athletes. And she was saying something that along the lines of sport specific training is a hoax. Like there's no such thing as like training specifically for like soccer or training specifically for hockey or training specifically for running even, although you could argue, I think there is like running specific training, so maybe I don't fully agree there. But at the same time, the premise was that you're training skills. So like if you're training like reflexes or you're training power or you're training endurance, you're training systems on the body that are able to do stuff and you're using those different athletic mechanisms in different ways. So I think that it's pretty cool to imagine the idea of like, if I have a goal, what's the new system that I want to train for that? How do I actually go about training that system? Of course, some of it will be doing that specific thing, absolutely. But just building those like actual systems of the body. And then ideally in the long run, I would like to believe, and I think we've seen this time and time again, that these systems can work together in ways that make you a better athlete over time. So yes, you might lose some of that like compounding effect endurance from an endurance perspective if you completely stop running and only focus on strength for a while. But I think if you maintain even just like a little bit of running in there of like building your base, and also when you come back, like that base will build a little bit faster. And at this point you have more durability and you have more power, then that can come across in different ways as well. So yeah, I think it's like interesting to think about different types of goals that athletes might take on. Like I know someone who would start with a goal like run a marathon and then would decide my next goal is doing X number of pull-ups. And then my next goal is going to be like running a super fast mile, and like would just like cycle through one goal to the next, which I actually thought was a really cool approach to training. Like, yes, it's not like building this long-term, like multi-year goal system, which is more common in the endurance sports world, but also what a cool way to develop like holistically as an athlete and then be able to like know that you have like mental confidence that you can put your mind to something and like build the system to go do the thing, which can be another cool way to think about training.
Yeah, and I think that maps also onto like how much time do you have in your life right now. So if it's like, let's say you have very little time, maybe you're like postpartum or something else is going on, you don't have a lot of time, but you still want goals, then like, yeah, I want to do 3 pull-ups could be a reasonable goal because you can spend 5 minutes working on that every single day. Like you can just try doing some or do whatever strength training will lay the foundation for that, which may take more than 5 minutes. But at the end of the day, it's not the same time investment and commitment as a massive goal. Like we've talked about on previous episodes, like sometimes when you shoot for these really, really big time consuming goals, you want to do an ultra, you want to do an Ironman, you even want to do a marathon. Sometimes for some people that can even be you want to do a half marathon. You do need to have the time to be bought into it, or else it probably won't go exactly as you want it to if you have like a big, ambitious A goal. So sometimes just pairing the goal itself and its corresponding time commitment with the time that you have, I think can lead to just like a lot more self-type fulfillment in the long run because you won't necessarily feel like you're behind, and you also can get that motivation that comes from just working towards a goal, but not feeling like it's just so out of reach logistically to even make it happen.
For sure, yeah, and that kind of, like, reminds me, and we've talked about goal setting before, and there's episodes where we talk about that way more in depth, but I'm just curious, like, off the top of your head right now, as we think about coaching or people, like, reflecting on this, obviously, like, time commitment and how invested they are in achieving their goal is one aspect of it. Although I also get a question often of, like, well, what is a reasonable amount of time to be able to put into this? Like, do I need to have to be able to achieve this goal? Which can be kind of nice for level setting, and sometimes I actually think that you need less time than you might think. Like, obviously, if you go all the way in on something, more time can sometimes equal better, not always. We also talk about that. You don't always want to like go off the cliff and do everything, but like having a certain amount of time to dedicate to training for a marathon, for example, can go a long way. But typically, like in the ultra world, people will come to me and like, how much time do you think I need to be, like, what am I capable of being able to train for a 50K or even a 50 miler or beyond, like 100K, 100 miler, thinking that it will have to scale linearly from like marathon training. And that's like not really the reality. You can do specific interventions, do some specific like training blocks, and like hit your weekends or your long runs well and still be relatively the same as like a marathon training block, for example, to do well in an ultra. In my opinion, I think there's scales, of course, but like in order to just go out and do the thing, I definitely think that you don't need as much time as you think. all that to say, are there other questions that you think people should be asking themselves to figure out what goals resonate, maybe what races they might or events they might want to train for, and check in on how their goals currently feel?
Yeah, so I put together like a little worksheet style list of questions that people could ask themselves. And I think just quickly, your point on time there, that's a great conversation to have with a coach. And a coach will usually be pretty upfront with you about like, how much time do we need to train for this? Are your goals, I really, really want to hit this particular time. Where are we at right now? Like, that's a great conversation to have with a coach. But for a conversation that's just sort of with yourself on what would actually be fun, I usually have people start with just asking themselves our favorite question, which is, what is my purpose in training and racing? Because I think that should be the guiding focus for really any type of goal setting. But then after that, if you feel pretty clear on your purpose, you can just kind of look at your training week and say, what workouts do I actually look forward to the most or rarely ever miss or prioritize when I know I'm going to have to skip some and will make others happen? Which ones am I prioritizing? Is it the speed stuff? If you're a multi-sport athlete, is it always the runs, always the bikes, always the swims, always the strength, etc.? Which ones do you dread or miss more often? Like if you're always skipping your swims, that's probably a good sign that you may not be enjoying that as much. It may not be bringing you as much joy, or it's just logistically too complicated. I also have people ask, what types of terrain do you naturally gravitate towards when given the option? So this is not just a running thing. We can think about this for running, for biking, even like pool versus open water if you have access to that. Of course, sometimes people's life circumstances is going to limit if like they can just get out on trails for any reason. But if you had all of those things accessed, like if you had trails out the door, pavement out the door, gravel biking, road biking, any of the above, what would you choose? I think is valuable. Another question is, if you were to pivot to unstructured movement, what does that movement usually look like? Like, are you going out for an easy run on your own? Are you going to go do some yoga or Pilates or like a group spin class, anything like that? Similarly, what are you doing in your off season? So if you choose to move and you have zero structure, what does that look like? A couple more questions. One is, what parts of races or training tend to be my strengths? So are you someone who is really good at like a fast finish? You can run people down. Are you just sort of steady all day? Do you do really well with short stuff, but not so much with long stuff? That's also valuable. Thinking about how you do on hills compared to other people as well. And then finally, this question, if I ignored prestige, expectations, and what everyone else was doing, what event would genuinely excite me to train for? I think a lot of the time we get pulled towards events that we think we should be doing or that we see other people doing. There's always like the Strava lens of this. But if you were like, wow, if nobody was watching at all, what would actually be really, really fun for me? I think sometimes it's not fear of the event itself, but it's fear of others' perceptions that like hold us back from doing particular events. So I would really try to ask yourself that. And that's also a sidebar, is like, that's why Strava breaks are sometimes a good thing, to just see like, what are you doing when no one is watching, or when you go data free, what does that type of movement look like for you? I think holistically, all of these things together can help us think about like, is there an event that is best paired with my answers to all these questions? And then discussing that with a coach, saying like, hey, I've done some deep diving and soul searching on myself. Do you have any thoughts on events that would match what I'm looking for here? I think sometimes that can land people somewhere that they might not have expected, but can really, really enjoy.
Yeah, I really love this. Those are all wonderful questions. And I think not only are those applicable to races, but they can be applicable to what we talked about with training too, like different ways that you can bring in some fun training sessions into your month or your summer as a whole. You can always reflect on. And I was talking with someone recently too. This reminded me of them saying, well, like, I mean, if I lived in the mountains, kind of like, making fun of me living in Utah, then I would run in the mountains all the time. Like, it's so beautiful. And I actually had this thought when I moved from Seattle to Boston, and like my favorite things were, seeing the water views or going out and doing something in nature. And then I was like, okay, one of these days I'm just going to go for a new run in a new location, and I'm going to go along the water because the water will be pretty to me no matter what. It's a different thing. And I'm going to make sure I get like a really nice smoothie and treat afterwards, because that was like when I think about my favorite adventures, it's been like going out to a new place, seeing something pretty and novel, and then like getting a nice snack. And like just the energy of like thinking through it in that way and putting that kind of like intentionality to it made that day feel more fun. And like, am I going to do that every day? Absolutely not. But like, it can add a little bit more joy into the process that we talked about earlier. So even if you think that like, wow, my favorite things are not accessible to me, I think that you can find elements of what made those your favorite things and bring those into the equation.
Absolutely. I think that's such a good point. And that's actually a nice segue into one more quick point that I had that also circles back what we were talking to before. But I had an athlete comment come through where an athlete said to me, I'm feeling like the pleasure I used to get from an activity is diminishing and I need more and more of it to get the same feeling. What do you do when this happens? Is there a podcast episode about this? And I was like, I actually don't know if there's a podcast episode about this, but we can make one. And this is actually really, really important and super normal. I think it goes back to this idea that our brains and our bodies are extremely adaptable to repeated stimuli. So the same workout or the same mileage that once felt really exciting can quickly become normal. And it's funny because I had this vivid memory of the first time I think that I ever just went for a run of my own accord. I think it was in high school because normally I had cross country and track practice and it was like I only ran during practice, but I think it was the summer and it was before preseason was going to start and it was a Saturday morning and I was like, I'm just going to wake up and go for a run. Like what an adult thing to do. And I think I ran like 3.5 miles and I came home and I made this like fancy smoothie and put all this fruit in and all this stuff. And I just felt like this is the coolest thing in the world. And now like running 3.5 miles on a Saturday morning, like I mean, it's great. Like it's a nice thing to do, but I felt so good as a result of that thing. And I will say the novelty of something like that has worn off a little bit. But I just wanted to bring this up because I think the natural feeling when people are like, oh, I need more and more of whatever activity is to hit the same stimulus. Sometimes the natural response is to just chase that with like more and more volume. But then I think that can just raise your baseline of what even feels like enough. And sometimes I think we actually need a little bit of a reset. I think these feelings are also incredibly common when life has been stressful, when you've been going for a long time without a break. Sometimes it's not even like burnout so much as I'm just kind of fatigued and I need a little bit more recovery or I need an off season, off day, things like that. But this bringing us back to what we were talking about before, bringing in some sense of novelty to restore that joy, I think is really, really important. So whether it's like a group workout, a fancy smoothie at the end, like you were talking about, figuring out what elements of movement are really, really exciting for you, and then bringing those into the things that you're able to do right now, I just think that's a nice sort of reframe for that persistent feeling of like it needs to be more and better and more exciting to actually get that good feeling now. Instead, thinking about maybe creative ways to get the feeling rather than having to totally go bigger every single time.
Totally. And I think, I don't know if this is the same thing because there's like obviously a neurochemical, just like the runner's high that you get from doing an activity, which can be something that I think burnout or not burnout necessarily, but fatigue can be a reason why it doesn't feel as good. Not the only reason, but like that's always a possibility. But when you were saying that, your story from high school reminds me of similarly, like I remember running like 7 miles for the first time in college and I was just so proud of myself. Like it just felt so big and so cool. And maybe that's another thing to reflect on. You're kind of mentioning the same thing here, but just like we've got our baseline has gotten too accustomed to us and we're not giving ourselves the same kind of credit or reward. So the reward part of our brain is not completion of the activity as it once was. So how can you bring in more of that reward? So some of it is psychological, maybe of just like giving yourself gratitude or appreciating what you just did. Some of it's like making it more fun for yourself, like making the nice, like being okay going and buying the nice coffee drink or getting the smoothie or whatever it is that would make you feel like, wow, that was really great. And whatever it is that would make your brain reward center just feel like more of that love. And that's where the novelty can help because doing a different kind of thing is another way for your brain to be like, wow, that was a new experience. Like, good for me for doing that. And so part of it's like, I think level setting where your baseline is and being okay with that, which I think can be the hardest thing to do. So that's like some deep work of just like, I don't have to expect so much of myself all the time. And then part of it is like, how can you kind of trick your brain into rewiring that reward center by having enjoyment with the activity that you love?
Totally agree. And I think with that, sometimes, when you're thinking the answer is more and more volume, I think resetting your brain actually often comes from less volume if volume is part of the issue here. So for me, sometimes like I had in the postpartum experience, for example, going to zero very quickly, a small amount felt awesome again. Like when I went to zero after, because there's obviously time that you need to heal and there's a lot of other things going on. When I was cleared to do like 20-minute spin on the Peloton, I was like, oh yeah, like this is fantastic. When in the past I would have been like, that's not even a workout. That doesn't even count as anything. And it totally counts. But taking the opportunity to reset your baseline, often with like a little bit of an off season or even like an off week after a big event, I think sometimes then things will swing back around quicker than you think. But it's scary to take that leap if you're really, really used to the volume that you've been doing, because in your head, you're like, well, of course, it would not be good to do less if I need more to feel good. I think sometimes just like radically flipping that on its head can actually be helpful.
Totally, and I wanna make it clear too that it goes both ways. Like, there are times where, like, you'll be like, "I'm taking on a new challenge, I'm so motivated for this big race, I'm leveling up my training in terms of volume," and, like, that does feel so much more rewarding because it's another new thing. It's just I think what's so hard for our brains, and it's, like, another point that I was reflecting on a little bit, is just that we are so bad at training the athlete that we are now. I think we always will fall back to athlete versions that we have been in, like, the best case scenarios and not adapting what we expect of ourselves and how we're training to exactly where we are in this, like, moment of our life, in this moment of our training journey, and that can look quite different. And so, Katie, that makes a lot of sense when you like that's really also cool to hear that when you had the postpartum experience and you came back, it's like, cool, I'm like so excited that I'm like properly following this journey for the path that I am in right now as an athlete, as opposed to being like, well, I was here before, that's where I want to get to, nothing else matters. Which I know it sounds aggressive, but I think so many of us do this even if we're not admitting it to ourselves. Or I've seen it so much like in how I reflect on my own training or how I've reflected with athletes who are frustrated coming back from something. They're like, this is so demoralizing that like this feels so hard. It's like, okay, just like buy into the journey and then make the journey the thing that is most important and protect your joy in the journey. And that can be like the guiding light that will bring you back to your goals, but not if you're only focused on the goals and not the journey, which is again, process goals, outcome goals. We talk about all this stuff. It's all related. But yeah, it's a hard problem, but it's honestly the first step is awareness. And I'm so glad this athlete like even asked this question because a lot of people will just like keep pushing through and not even realize or not like think about the problem of the fact that they don't enjoy it anymore. And that's where you can get into harder comebacks.
Totally, totally agree. And I feel like what we're hitting on right now is these lessons that we've sort of picked up over time. You had another insight. I'm going to try for a smooth transition. You had another great insight here on training lessons you wish you'd internalized 5 years ago. I think you probably just hit like an extra one right there. But could we go through some of those lessons? Because I think if we want like a one-stop shop for some of the most important things that we've picked up on training over time, it's many of these. So let's hit that insight next.
Yeah, for sure. So I actually think that you're right. I should have added this one more, and I'll just maybe like cement that for myself, which is train the athlete that you are now. Don't be caught up in past versions of yourself. I think, at least for my brain, it's a lot harder to like, it's still hard to compare always or not to compare always, but it's really hard not to compare to past versions of yourself, more so even than it can be to not compare to like other peers. So focus on the version of the athlete that you are now. And that means be also informative about it or like objective about it. Like what data can you collect on the version of yourself right now? How can you know if you're adapting to training or not? Can you check in on, both feel and performance, which is another one of my points. So like, first off, yeah, like I said, train the athlete that you are now. Second, feelings are also data. I think so often we, especially people getting into it for the first time or committed to a goal for the first time, like we'll ignore feelings and you can do that for a while, but you will learn at some point that feelings are data. And so you might as well have that knowledge going into it. And that, what I mean by that is motivation, enjoyment, excitement, how your legs feel, how the pop that you feel in your legs, like things that you just can like feel without being able to put a tangible metric to. Those are also pieces of data that you should pay attention to. And so Katie and I have talked before about having a log where you're able to like track these things for yourself, like rate them on a scale of 1 to 5 or something like that, which can help you understand how those are trending. I have found that almost always when feelings like you lose motivation, you lose enjoyment, you lose excitement over time, those are signals that are definitely worth paying attention to because it typically means that the performance is going to suffer as well. Related to that then, so I've also say one bad day is noise, but 2 bad weeks is information. Somewhere in between there could also be information, but I think the point being that we often have athletes spiral after one bad workout, and we have spiraled in both individually on, one bad workout or one bad day, and it is noise, so don't worry too much about it. It's the rule of thirds. You're going to have bad days. Don't let one workout ruin your thinking about your confidence for a goal. However, like a little bit longer than that, so I said 2 weeks, I think it could be dependent on like when something's off, but anywhere from a week to 2 weeks of consistently things not feeling good, that's information. Again, don't panic, but use that information. Obviously communicate with your coach if you have that relationship, or if it's yourself, like make sure you're intervening by taking some of the pressure off right away and then seeing how your body responds to that. And then I think if things are still not feeling good, that's when I think it's worth talking to a doctor, getting blood tests, etc. Make sure that things are okay, but use that as information to listen to, not just to push through. So 1 bad day is noise, 2 bad weeks is information. Related to that, I think what can lead to 2 bad weeks is easy runs not actually feeling easy. I think I knew that easy runs should feel easy, and yet it's still sometimes hard to actually go super, super easy. And so I think there's a range of easy. There's Z1 and Z2, which is a huge spectrum. If you look at like the heart rate spectrum, Z1 and Z2 make up most of the heartbeats in that spectrum, and then it gets pretty tight down the line. So even if you're like running at the very top end of your Z2, it's still technically Z2 and it might feel very easy, but it still could be a little bit of extra stress that your body doesn't need, particularly if you're changing other variables like increasing volume or increasing intensity. And so just know that it's very, very okay, if not encouraged, to have easy runs or easy workouts or whatever feel very, very easy. I actually have found that some of my best successes or the best I have felt training actually comes after long adventures that are like almost entirely Z1, like hiking for a mountaineering adventure or something like that. Again, not a lot of people have that kind of time, and I don't even have that time all the time to do like a whole day of being outside. But when I do, it makes me feel really, really good. And I think it's another example of having really easy volume sometimes. So don't stress having to have easy runs feel like they're still Z2, but I have a certain pace that I run them at. Throw it out the window. Try going really, really easy to the point where you feel like you're impatient with yourself, and practice that patience. I think that's an awareness that can be really helpful to work through. And then finally, I have a couple more. Fitness compounds, fatigue compounds faster. So trust that your fitness is developing over time. It really is. It will. Consistency will pay off in that way. However, your fatigue, if you're not feeling good, if one of these feelings is off, it's been 2 bad weeks or whatever, that will compound way faster. So listen to what's happening. It's going to be a harder hole to dig out of the more you try to push through that. And so trust that your fitness will continue compounding over the long term, but your fatigue in that moment is a stronger signal to listen to. And again, it comes back to adaptability of training. This is not, I feel like we give a lot of stuff that's like, take off the pressure, all this stuff. It's true to a certain extent, but we also know that a lot of people are pushing for hard goals, and we have ourselves as well. So it's more just a sign that you should adapt to your training before you layer more on, which is a classic tenet of how we think about training, add volume on in small chunks, etc. And then finally, consistency beats hero weeks. So this is the adaptability point that I was just making. Rather than focusing on sexy numbers, I think it's really easy to look at someone's training volume and say, oh, they do X many hours or they hit X many miles this week. That's what I should be doing as well. But the reality is, if you can only do that like for 1 or 2 weeks before falling apart, that's not really doing you anything. And I would much rather have someone who's able to like slowly build up over time and adapt really, really well to their volume, and then like make it feel easy, and then add a little bit more on and build up that durability. That's like a years long process than someone who's just like, I'm going to go do a 100-mile week because I've been running, for a year casually 20 to 30 miles. And I really want to go do a 100-mile week. And like that in itself can be a goal that'd be kind of cool to do, but don't do it because you think it's going to make you like that much better of an athlete. It's not going to last in the same way as having consistency over time. That's a lot. I kind of just like spieled.
That was amazing. Elena, each one of these topics could be its own podcast episode. I love that you just hit them so effectively right there. I do want to add one brief addendum to the last one because I think I love that one. This consistency beats hero weeks. And the thing that stands out to me is that often achieving your goals is a multi-year process. And I think that's tricky because a lot of the time people set these big goals for one particular season and maybe they hit it, maybe they don't. But if they did hit it, it probably also reflects the work that they have put in for years and years and years to get to that point that they could even shoot for that goal. And I think it's hard because often you see, we follow people on Instagram, like we see professionals out there doing the big, sexy, amazing thing, but no one was probably paying attention to what they were doing like 10 years ago, maybe not even 5 years ago, things like that. So I think it's just important to keep in mind that the consistency comes from laying bricks year after year after year. And I feel like I've had the privilege of working with some athletes for several years now and knowing that like in the beginning, they were new and there was not anything crazy happening. But the most successful athletes are the ones that have been able to just do sort of the unsexy base work consistently over a period of many, many, many years. And what's nice about that is then it can lend itself to, like we've been talking about before, lots of different goals. Once you've established that base of like, I'm going to make this a big part of my life, I'm going to just quietly chip away and build this foundation the entire time, you can just turn the lever of like, well, now I want to do trails. Now I want to do long bikes. Now I want to do triathlon. Now I want to do an Ironman, whatever it is. Now I want to go to Kona. Now I want to qualify for whatever. Like all of that, I think the world is your oyster, but it takes a really, really long time to get there. So don't be discouraged if you're new and you feel like, how could I ever get to any particular outcome that I see other people doing? It takes a long, long, long time. And it also takes some degree of luck and genetics and other things like that. But I think the most powerful variable there is consistency over your time. And I have never seen an athlete like be really, really consistent for years and years and years and never achieve their goals. Like they might not achieve every single goal, and sometimes there's variance in what those goals are and what the times look like, but there is no story in which you put in the work forever and ever and ever and you get absolutely nothing out of it and never improve. That's just not really how the world works. So remind yourself of that on days that you feel particularly discouraged.
For sure. I really love that addendum. And I know I just like put these, I think there's a lot more lessons I could put in there. These are just ones that I was reflecting on recently. Katie, do you have any other like high level lessons that come to your mind apart from that addendum?
I think, I mean, honestly, you hit this so comprehensively and so well that I'd probably have to sit down and like very work hard to add additional ones. So maybe on a future episode, we'll figure out like lessons that you didn't hit that I have. But I think this is fantastic. Maybe actually one that's in here that's coming to mind right now is fueling matters so much, sleep matters so much,
Yes,
all the
yeah.
things that we talk about literally all the time on the podcast. Basically, just your input matters as much as your output, and inputs come in a lot of different ways. But I think it's very, very easy to do the training and very, very hard to recover sometimes. So make sure that you're
Yes.
putting enough fuel in and taking the time for the recovery as much as you can if you want to realize all of those adaptations.
For sure. Recovery is takes as much focus as the training. Actually, one other thing that I'll say that's on this for me as well is mental prep being as important and as practicable as training in general, and how useful that has been for me and for athletes that I've worked with, I think, I hope at least. And I was just doing a course review for a really hard course out here for people. And most of the questions and most of the interest, I think, was actually less on the course and how to mentally prepare and think through the course, which is really interesting to me. And maybe other people who are listening might relate that when actually like push comes to shove, you're interested in harnessing some of those mental skills. And so, yeah, I think that can be a really important part of the equation to work on too. And that's partly like self-knowledge and learning what works for you as well. But yeah, we could talk about this forever. We think obviously we do this podcast because endurance sports are such good lessons for life, and a lot of these things translate to life in different ways. But yeah, it's definitely a lifelong learning process, and we're still learning, I think. That's like Abby Hall's post that we read last time on the pod, where she's like, I'm still trying to take apart this puzzle, even though I won this race last year. This year it like fell apart in Western states, and there's always things to learn. And I think I feel that way, and hopefully other athletes feel that way, which is why it's like a worthwhile journey to be on.
Yeah, and it's what keeps us coming back, honestly. Like there is so much learning to be had with this whole journey, which is very, very cool. And everything is always a moving target in terms of life context, in terms of weather, in terms of bandwidth, all of that. So very, very fun for us to be involved with this. In the spirit of learning, I think we probably have time for one more insight. Lena, you had a few quick thoughts on how we can become better athletes this summer. Do you want to close out with this one and then we'll hit challenging gear pick of the week?
Yeah, sure, I can do that. I was just thinking about this because summer is challenging, and it's been especially challenging recently. Boston and New York and the East Coast in general had like this 100-degree heat wave, and it's been hot in Utah. So I was thinking about how you can reframe using the summer to your advantage. This is more targeted probably at people who are not trying to peak right now in the summer, but I think a lot of people think about summer as a really good training ground for fall races. And in that case, there's a few things I think are worth thinking about. First is embrace the heat adaptation. I know it sucks. It doesn't mean every single run has to be at peak heat, but it does mean that when it is at peak heat, or if you go out and you just feel like it's really hot, remind yourself that this is helping you to a certain extent. Don't destroy yourself, but just be patient. Bring the effort down, bring the pace down, be okay with that, and let the heat adaptation do some work. I think you'll be surprised at how good you feel as soon as cool temperatures hit. You'll be like, oh my gosh, like I was running with basically sandbags on my feet for a few months, and that can go a long way both mentally and physically. Similarly, I would think about time on feet. This is like we were talking about adventures, we were talking about bringing novelty into training. Summer also is wedding season, and there's a lot of wedding dancing going on. So I always try to think about time on feet and using that to my advantage in the summer, building durability, being out for long adventures, being able to go do a bunch of different things at lower, quote unquote, lower intensity, do the Z1 stuff. I think that can be a really good time to do it. I think it's a great time to strength train, trade the heat for the air conditioned gym, and get a little bit of extra strength training in and focus on your weaknesses, build that durability that would serve you well in the fall and winter. I think it's also a really good time to focus on drills. So strides, hill strides, being really effective with your training, because I think that the heat can make it such that your like elevated Z4, Z5 will feel that much harder because your body's also fighting for heat preservation when you're working that hard. So it's a really good time to do short things that are really good drills, like those fast strides or whatever, that don't also strain you so much. And so that's why I feel like summer is a good time for that as well. And then it's a really good time to focus on fueling and hydration. It's always a good time to focus on fueling and hydration, but particularly when it's hot out, I think hydration falls by the wayside sometimes. It can make you feel a lot better. So all this kind of came together with this idea of like, if pace isn't something that people feel great about when it's hot out in the summer, pick one non-pace metric and focus on it and see if it makes you a better athlete. Use it as a time to experiment on yourself so that when you get to the fall, you're like, wow, I feel like I was focused. I feel like I really improved something. And it builds the confidence when other training can feel less good sometimes, especially if you're using your old mental frameworks for it. So pick a new mental framework, a new non-pace metric, and focus on that. A couple ideas for that: consistency. So it doesn't have to be, I don't know, hitting really long runs or hitting really fast paces, but can you get out and do, 30 minutes easy more consistently, build the volume? Can you focus on weekly strength if you haven't already been doing that? It's a good time to start getting into that. Can you focus on your daily carbs for your workouts and like know that you're fueling well enough if you haven't dialed that in yet? Are you sleeping? Can you focus on your sleep routine and make sure you're sleeping really well? The recovery that Katie was just talking about, like how important recovery is. Can you dial in your recovery routine and focus on that? Or can you like make sure you're getting your strides in? Like a lot of people will skip strides sometimes, and I get it, but like, can you really focus on getting your strides in? Hydration again, like are you drinking enough water each day? There's different little pieces you can focus on that are not pace related that I think can make people just like feel a lot better and even mentally just have something to focus on that's different than their pace strategy.
Yeah, I feel like this is setting us up for a whole podcast episode, sort of on just like self-efficacy in the context of training, which can really take a hit in the summer because everything feels slow and hard. But if you instead can be getting these little mental boosts of like, I set a mini goal and I achieved it, or I have process goals and I'm in alignment with those, I think this is exactly what this is. And having these mini outcome goals, even in the week of like, yes, I checked the boxes of my strength sessions, or I hit my daily carb target, or I slept for 9 hours, or whatever it is. All of those things, I think, can help us feel better about our training in general, which, as we talk about all the time, fuels motivation, fuels better performance. It's a really helpful kind of positive feedback loop rather than the spiral of like, oh my gosh, it is 95 degrees and 80% humidity yet again today in Boston. So something to be thinking about. And quick sidebar, heat acclimation does work. I will say, I feel like even I've been experiencing like days that are now like 80 degrees and 70% humidity, nowhere near as bad as they were in early June. So there is some type of adaptation happening here. You do have to trust the process a little bit. But just like you said, knowing that once we get that first crisp day in the fall, everyone's going to be like, whoa, I am way faster than I thought I was. That'll feel really, really good. So hold out hope for it because it is coming. And I can already see glimpses of it in both my own training and some of my athletes.
Well, for sure. It's exciting to think about. But also, don't wish away the summer because there's some really great things about summer as well. Hopefully, people are getting some swimming time and popsicles and ice cream and had a really good fourth. But yeah, it's a fun time to be an athlete. In the summer, it also brings its own unique challenges. And I hate the heat, so I'm really feeling it.
Definitely. All right. Well, this was a lot of fun. Super rich episode full of insights. Let's close it out with our challenge of the week. Elena, what is your challenge of the week?
Okay, my challenge of the week is highly related to everything we've been talking about, which is just plan an explore or adventure activity, a run, bike, swim, or something like that, whatever feels exciting to you. What's a new place that would be fun to check out? Just think of something that'd be fun and go do it. Why not? I think it'd be a nice thing to do, honestly, most weeks.
I love that. And my challenge of the week is brainstorm on out of the box goal events that you might enjoy or be good at. I had outlined a bunch of questions. If you want to actually do those questions like a worksheet, you can find them in our show notes, which are linked in the sort of bio or blurb of the podcast. So please check those out. And we always have extended show notes on our website, which are also linked there. So yeah, just do a big brainstorm. And then of course that can lend into a conversation with your coach or with a friend or someone else about what do we think would be a good goal event that matches what I really enjoy and think that I'm good at.
I love it. Sounds great. Katie, what's your gear or resource pick of the week?
All right, so I'm in my starting solids with the baby era, and so there's a lot of sort of pureed food in my house, and I am recommending Go-Go Squeeze applesauce because every single day I'm eating like 2/3 of a Go-Go Squeeze after my son has had a little bit of his, and it's a really good hit of carbs, and it's one of those foods that's like not marketed as endurance fuel, but actually is really good endurance fuel. So if you need some easy, quick endurance fuel, I would recommend Go-Go Squeeze applesauce.
I love that. I saw that on here. I was like, this is a recommendation for the babies and the runners out there
Yes.
and the athletes, which I love. And I also actually have genuinely used Go-Go Squeeze before on adventures. It doesn't pack as much carbs, but it's like nice, very small snack and it's delicious and like comes in one of those gel packs anyways. Like, why not? It's great.
Love it. All right, Elena, you also have food and some additional gear/resource picks of the week. What are yours?
Okay, mine is, well, this is kind of lame because I ran out of gear pick ideas, but slushies because they have been getting me through my runs. I go to a 7-Eleven after most of my hot runs and I get a slushie, and the entire run I'm thinking about how I'll get to have my slushie, and it's straight sugar, so it's like carbs afterwards, and I usually try to pair it with a protein shake, so I feel like I'm getting my recovery in right away, and why not? It's fun. It's fun to have a slushie, and they're cheap. They're like $2.
Wait, question.
So
what is your flavor combo of slushie?
great question because it changes. 7-Eleven has quite a lot of options. I think there's like depending on which one I go to, like anywhere from 4 to 10 different options.
Nice.
So I typically mix 2. I will never get just a single flavor that's boring. I always get at least 2. And I typically will go for like a blue and a red. So like some kind of like blue raspberry cherry mix, but then I'll sometimes do cherry and cola mixed.
Mm.
And then there was a mango one time that I was really feeling. So I did mango and blue raspberry. But then the most recent one I got what I thought was strawberry and blue raspberry, but for some reason it tasted like pina colada. So I think that the person that was mixing the slushies like accidentally mixed pina colada into one of them. And I wasn't really loving that as much, but I still drank it.
This is not a knock to 7-Eleven, but employee, you know who you are.
Yeah, yeah. Come on, mix the slushies clean, please.
Awesome. And you also have an exciting bonus resource pick of the week. Let's hit that really quick.
Yeah, I was just gonna do a quick shout out. I did publish what I'm considering like it's mostly female athlete focused, so a female athlete health resource hub, but it's not, it goes beyond health right now. It's just basically a ton of resources that I have found helpful for either myself or athletes I coach. And one of the things on there is a mental prep worksheet that we've talked about and referenced before, but if anyone just wants to reference it live, you have races coming up. I know several athletes I work with are actually doing these like community 5K, 10K events once a week, and it's a really great time to practice mental prep in a racing mindset as a full practice, like not even putting that much intentionality on the races, but like being able to go through that whole workflow, which I think is really beneficial as you think about bigger goals down the line. So if anyone wants to work on mental prep, this worksheet's out there and live along with many other resources out there that we will link in the show notes. But the website where you can find stuff is called Coralta. So it's CORALTA.co. And then there's a bunch of resources on there. And if you have any feedback or questions, please let me know. I'd love to hear it.
And huge shout out to you, Elena. This is such a cool resource hub. I was lucky enough to sort of check it out when it was in its sort of beta stage, but it's looking amazing right now. So I really would encourage all of our listeners to check this out. And of course, to send in your feedback. It will be linked in the show notes just below this episode. So you can find that link directly. But congrats, Elena, because it's really, really exciting that this is going live. And I know this reflects so much hard work and you're absolutely crushing it. Just showing what the world needs or identifying what the world needs and then doing the thing. You're absolutely crushing it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And there's a lot more work to do. Don't get me wrong. I have a lot more that I'm envisioning that would be more useful down the line. But the starting place is getting the free resources out there because I think there is so much low-hanging fruit to help people be better athletes, humans, etc. So yeah, we'll see.
Awesome. Well, everyone, thank you so much for listening and for listening to our gear picks and all of our lessons and all of that. We will be back next week with another episode as always. But if you're new to the podcast, please consider hitting follow, liking the podcast, commenting on it, sharing it with someone who might be interested, or just keeping up your listening. We really, really appreciate it. And we will catch you next time.